So Garrett Wilson actually starts my wide receiver, my second tier list,
Okay.
just because these other guys, I think they deserve to be in the class of their own. But Garrett Wilson, he's one of the guys I talked about it off air about guys who are um, underrated. Everybody knows how good Garrett Wilson is, and everybody knows how good he'll be. So I see a lot of people in fantasy circles talking about the sleeper pick that is Garrett Wilson. Honey, Garrett Wilson's not a sleeper. Everybody knows how good he is. He's
Yeah.
just like Justin Fields. Everybody knows how good Justin Fields is. Garrett Wilson, to start the next year, these are the guys who they're either from the previous tier that might be taking a step back, or they're in this tier and they're about to move up. And for that, I have to start the list Garrett Wilson, who I think could ultimately be wide receiver one this year. I mean that 100%.
Should have put
100%.
him in your tier one.
I should have put him in my tier one. Another person in that tier who's going to get just as many targets with him, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Absolute freight train. Him and Jared Goff have an amazing connection. Jared Goff came out a couple weeks ago saying that he could suspect Amon-Ra St. Brown to have upwards of 170 targets, which would eclipse some of these other guys we mentioned. CeeDee Lamb, same idea with him. And then two guys who um, I put them below, even though they have fantasy production in years past, they are getting a little bit older. They're on the other side of 30. That's Cooper Cup and Devontae Adams for me.
Mm.
Both guys are very much capable. Cooper Cup was fantasy points per game wise number one, but he got hurt, of course. And that's why I have him in the second tier. Not because Cooper Cup is not fantastic. Same with Devontae. They still have it in them. However, wide receiver ones, the first tier, safest picks. These guys more than capable of being wide receiver ones. Garrett Wilson and Amon-Ra St. Brown, two of my favorite players in the league. These
Yeah.
guys start the second tier.
Yeah, second tier is great. And then with my second tier, I'll allude back to a point you said before. You don't want two guys from the same team. So second tier is still elite wide receivers. The others are just a lock to be elite. But these are guys I think are fine number ones to be your number one. And I'm not going to pick another guy from the same team like Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, just for some context there. But starting off this, just because I think he gets way too much hate, and I think people over um, exaggerate how bad his injuries have been in the past. He used steroids to get over the injuries. DeAndre Hopkins, are we just going to sit back here and keep disrespecting one of the most talented wide receivers in the league in DeAndre Hopkins? Not at this show, not at my show. DeAndre Hopkins is still my favorite wide receiver in the league. No one talks about him. I don't know if there's a weird thing going on, but I think DeAndre Hopkins should be at this list. He played how many games last year and was
Nine.
still a top 20 wide receiver last year. And then people want to talk about this guy like he's washed up. He's not. He's coming back. He's going to be great next year. And then after that, I have Devontae Adams. I think Devontae Adams is a guy who's going to get his no matter what. Still have Hunter Renfro there, but I think if Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy, he still helped George Kittle have big numbers. Still had Debo Samuel get good numbers. I think Jimmy G and Devontae Adams are a good fit there. And then after that, I have to put Amon St. Brown there because he's just the man. I mean, he's everything you want character wise in a wide receiver. Jared Goff loves him, and I feel like he's the opposite of like what someone like a Des Bryant has a problem with, where he's so talented at what he does as a route running, physical. He's like a Julian Edelman. He's like a Larry Fitzgerald type of guy and wide receiver. I don't think he's as good as Larry Fitzgerald, but he gives me that type of vibe. And then I also have to put DK Metcalf out there. Still think DK Metcalf is the man in Seattle, even though we have Jackson Smith and Jigba. And then I have Calvin Ridley.
Mm.
Calvin Ridley was a top 10 wide receiver in Atlanta before with Matt Ryan. Do we think Trevor's better than Matt Ryan?
At that point, yeah.
Yeah, so I think Calvin Ridley, when you talk about sleepers and people just are kind of scared to talk about him because they don't want to be wrong, I'll put myself out there, say he's going to be a tier two, a fine number one wide receiver. And then to round this whole list out with the cherry on top, Amari Cooper.
Hmm.
This guy just goes out there and balls. I mean, he went out there, balled in Oakland, was a top five wide receiver for a short period of time, went to Dallas, balled out there, went to Cleveland, was still a really solid number one wide receiver. If we're talking about tier two as a fine, solid number one wide receiver, not the stars as the guys above like CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase. I think you still have to put Amari Cooper in the conversation out of respect.